Hi there, Beverly. Is that you? Hello?
Hey, how you doing today?
Good. How you doing? I'm glad I can hear you. Good. That's good.
Yeah, I figured that's what that check was of, microphone check 1, 2. I get it.
Great. Are you Kevin?
I am Kevin.
Hi, Kevin. I'm Linda. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Here's my
Yeah.
lovely face.
Where are you? There you are. Oh, cute as could be. Thank you. Okay, good. Good, good, good. All right. Well, I have no idea. I already heard from several people that are not coming.
Okay.
They have appointments and whatnot, so they're not showing. So I don't know how many we're going to get.
Alrighty. Well, we're
First part
here.
is that there are people that did read the book and would have been very good discussion people. So I feel a little bit at loose ends about that, but we'll hope for the best.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just get them. Okay, are we letting people in now? Are you starting to let people in?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Good, good, good.
The waiting room is empty.
Okay, everybody's in so far? Good. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Let me see who we've got here now. Let's see, who have I got? I see Lila, you're connecting. Carol, I see you. How are you?
Hey.
Good. I'm so glad that you're on. And let's see who else. I see an iPhone. Who's on the iPhone?
I'm on the iPhone.
Good. What is your name?
Shirley,
Hi, Shirley. Good. So welcome. So glad you're on. And
thank you.
I see a Shelly. Shelly. Okay, maybe her audio isn't on.
Yeah, Shelly's muted right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, good. I was saying how I know several people are not coming on board today. They called and let me know that they weren't going to be here. So some of our regular members. So I'm glad to see Glad to see you guys. Hi, Beverly. I see you.
Hi. If I may add just a little thing right now before you get started.
Go for it.
I've been coming to you for quite a while. Love your presentations. It's just very enjoyable. Having said that, I went on earlier, a couple hours ago, to pick up the Zoom link, and it wasn't there. Long story short, I've made 5 phone calls in the past 30 minutes till I found somebody at the J who was very sympathetic and understood what had to be done, went and pursued it, and finally I got on. But it was just
Sure.
unacceptable inefficiency.
Right.
And it ended up that she sent it to me and it ended up in junk mail. The only reason I tell you this is not about me, is as much for your
I
information.
so appreciate that, because you know what? I have heard from other people that they've tried to get on and they can't get on, and you were perseverant. But that's great. You've been with us before, so other people that are new are not necessarily going to persevere.
It hasn't, it's never happened before like this. And then I was told, well, they're going to put the Zoom link on in a few minutes. I said,
Yeah.
are you kidding me? It's 1:15.
Oh, okay.
You should put it on 3 days before, not
Right.
at the last second. So I wanted you to know that.
Thank you. I know everybody's doing the best they can do. So yeah, but I appreciate that. And I'm sure that Kevin, you're hearing this.
Yeah,
Kevin,
just out
yeah.
of curiosity, who did you talk to that said that they were going to post the link at 1:15?
Whoever answered the phone, and I don't remember, it was a female. And of course, it never came on, but then I called back again, number 5 phone call, and I spoke to, oh my God, she sent Jody? No, with a J. Joni, yes. And she was extremely helpful, and I want you to know that, because with criticism comes compliments as well. And she was the only one that pursued it, and I think she went and found you. Are you Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
and somehow it came on through her.
I'm in the middle of my book
into
club. What?
And I shouldn't have to have this happen, and 5 phone calls later.
Okay, well, you know what? It's well taken, right, Kevin? We can always, everybody can look to improve anything, right?
Oh,
Everything.
yeah. I was just wondering who she talked to. That way we could resolve this, because
Well, they kept,
the emails went out.
and if you
Before
were
that.
listening, and they kept sending me to the athletic department. So something's wrong.
So one good suggestion might be, on our days, maybe we can always let the receptionist have the information so she can even handle it without fielding the phone call anywhere else. That would be one good suggestion, right?
That's a very good,
Whoever answers the
from my
phone.
point.
It's a great idea. They do know to send it to us, so I don't know what happened, but I'm
Well-
glad that you have been able to join in and get the link.
Right.
If I may say one last thing, and if I may be bold, sending it to somebody is, of course, the right thing to do. But every time they connect you, you get a recording. They'll call you back. So that is a little hard to take as well. Anyway, I'm leaving it with you guys. You know what you're doing. Hopefully it'll smooth itself out.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you. Good. Well, I'm so glad to see you now here and see everybody else who's here. Judy, I see you joined us. Terry, I see Terry's iPhone. Ruth, I see you. Okay, great. So anybody who can, turn on your faces so I can see you at the same time, okay? If you can. I know sometimes we can't do that when we're doing other things sometimes. But if you can, it would be great. So I'm so glad to see everybody. Kevin, were you going to make me a co-host? Is that how we were going to do this?
I can see how I can do that. Let me see what I can do for you here.
Well, I'm not even sure. I just am wondering if other people come. Are you going to be leaving us soon? Is that it?
I'll be here for a little while. I did just make you the co-host though, but
Okay.
I will be here for a while. I'll just be
Yeah.
in the background
Okay.
doing some work in the meanwhile.
Okay, good. Okay, super. All right, good. So everybody, so glad to see you. Are we on time here? Should we begin? Yeah, I think we should wait another couple minutes, or is it 2:00 yet? Yeah.
How do I find out another book?
So if you've got people talking in the background, go ahead and mute yourselves, okay? Yeah, so go ahead and mute yourselves if you're talking in the background. Otherwise, unmute, because of course, this whole thing is we want to be able to have discussion.
Because I called 5 times.
So let me begin by going over with you some things about our upcoming books. Let's see, we said that for December, I think, are we changing our date in December? Did we talk about that? No, yes. In December, we're good because our third Thursday is December 15th. So that's good. So that's our third Thursday, which is our regular time. And for that date on December 15th, we are going to do Eternal. Has anybody read that one yet? A lot of people have already read it and given it good reviews. Did you read it already? Lynn, were you saying yes, you have read it? Okay. I saw a couple people
I
nodding.
started it, but I didn't finish it.
Good, yeah, people.
And I
have-
wanted you to know, I didn't finish this book, but I'm
Okay.
gonna come back to it, but I wanted to come to the discussion,
so
but I
glad you
read
did.
most of it.
I'm so
Okay.
glad you did. And you know what? It's going to be a few spoiler alerts in here, but that's okay.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. And you kind of know where it's going anyways, right?
Right, yes,
I kind of know where. Okay.
yes.
So anyways, that is what we have in December. January, I believe we are canceling January and we are picking up in February with a book called The Yellow Wife, but you'll hear more about that next month. Okay. So just to, refresh your memory about the date for next month and of course the book Eternal. So to begin, let me give you a little bit of background about the author because knowing his background is going to fill in a lot of your thoughts and your questions about this book, about Midnight Library. What you should know about this book, by the way, it was selected by all of these different book clubs for a selection. It was on the bestseller list for weeks and weeks and weeks, not only here, but certainly in England. The author is a British guy. And it's amazing how long this book has sustained itself as a bestseller. And later we're going to talk about what is it that resonated so much with everybody. I'm going to give you a summary for those of you that have not read it or those of you that have not finished it. So we'll go from there. But the author himself is Matt Haig, and Matt is a British author for not only adults, but also for children. His memoir, Reasons to Stay Alive, was his first book, nonfiction. It was a memoir all about his life, and it was on the bestseller list in Britain, on the list for 46 weeks. And for 46 weeks, it was among the top 10 books in the United Kingdom. What's interesting about him is that he's written other novels that also were very well received. He wrote How to Stop Time. He wrote The Radleys, The Humans. But this Midnight Library has really been the book that has really put him on the map here in the United States. He was born in 1975 in Sheffield, England. He grew up in another community, Newark, England. He studied at Hull University and Leeds University. And he currently lives in a community in the UK, York. He ran his own marketing internet company. He worked in a nightclub in Spain, which you're going to hear more about. And then he became a full-time writer. Now, most of his nonfiction books, such as Reasons to Stay Alive and Midnight Library, have all been influenced by the fact that when he was 24 years old, he suffered from a breakdown. It was a mental health issue. He still suffers from anxiety, he tells us. In fact, when he went to write his memoir, he was really worried about even starting it because he was afraid of the pain that he would have to go through in reliving that scary period of time in his life when he had this breakdown. And what he describes in that book and what he wants us to know is that when he was 24, he was working in this nightclub in Spain with his girlfriend, Andrea, who is now his wife. He was working with her in Ibiza, Spain, and he says his world caved in. He said he writes plainly and beautifully, and he says it was the day his old me died. It started with a thought. He did not know then the strange physical effects that depression and anxiety could create. He thought he was going to die. He felt his heart giving out, and he says it was just the beginning. It would be way over a year before, quote, I would feel anything like even half normal again. He tells us how he went to bed for 3 days, did not sleep. There was no relief. He wanted to be dead. And then I heard him online and he said, well, really, it wasn't just that he wanted to be dead. He just didn't want to be alive. And he told his girlfriend how scared he was. And on the third day, instead of going out, which he was starting to do, he was going to go out and end it all, commit suicide. Instead of that, his girlfriend took him to his childhood home where she, along with his parents, nursed him back. I'm not going to say to good health, but they got him back on the road to mental health. The problem, he says, is that mental illness is an illness that is often unseen. And our language is not even up to the job. As a society, we do not have the tools to respond to mental illness. Our scientific understanding is not there. Neuroscience remains, he says, a baby science. He says, with mental health, we are almost back to where physical health was in the 18th century. It's like we're still putting leeches on ourselves. For him, the path to recovery, he says, was time and love. Those were his paths to recovery. He calls his wife, who was then his girlfriend, but his wife now, Andre, he says, she is his life sitter. You know, it's kind of cute, a play on words, not a babysitter, but a life sitter. She's the one who helps him. And he knows he's made other changes in his life. He tells us he gave up drinking. He does more exercise. He watches what he eats. He says these are not prescriptive answers for anyone else because everyone's experience with depression is different. There are many paths to good mental health, but it helps to remember that your brain is part of your body. After reading his first book, Reasons to Stay Alive, and Midnight Library, people have asked him the question, are you religious? And his answer is he identifies as an atheist, although he doesn't like the word, doesn't like being called an agnostic, doesn't like even spiritual. And he says he wishes he had more of a religious framework, and he gets a little jealous of people that do, in fact, have sort of a feeling of faith. He says he's sort of open-minded. He understands that so much of human life is about a search, and it could be a religious search, or it could be just a more general existential search. He says for him, books are his one true faith, and that his library is the church. One of the paths back to his own good health was in reading, and he says books supplied him with what he needed at that time. It's so good to have something you believe in. For him, the scariest part was that in his darkest hours of depression, he even lost faith in words. He got to the point where he would be reading something, he would understand the meaning of the sentence, but he didn't care about it. It didn't take him anywhere. He had no imagination about it. And he said, for him, that was the scariest place to be. As someone who had always loved reading and stories, the idea of opening a book and not being moved by it, well, that was terrifying. What's interesting is from that point of darkness in his life that I'm telling you about now, he has since then sold over 3 million books worldwide. So what he has to say obviously resonates with a lot of people. He tells us that writing continues to be therapeutic for him. He lives today in England with his wife. They now have 2 children, and he seems to be doing quite well. For those of you who read the book, I'm going to give you a little refresher, and those of you that did not finish it yet, we'll talk about that when we get to the ending, okay? But basically, the book starts out, we meet the protagonist. Her name is Nora Seed. You should know, by the way. He says he started writing this book from the point of view of a man, a male. And then he says the truth of the matter is he realized it was too close for comfort. He decided not to write it from that perspective. He needed to write it from a woman's perspective. It's almost as if he needed a protective shield. Ironically enough, once he made it a woman, he was able to make it very autobiographical. He was able to share the way that he was feeling using her as his protagonist. So we meet Nora Seed, and one thing we know about her from the beginning is what? What does she want? You remember? She wants to die. Book starts out 25 hours before Nora Seed decided she wanted to die, right? Every chapter begins 9.5 hours before Nora Seed decided she wanted to die. So we see right away the depths of her depression. What we learn is that her relationships are in shambles. Her beloved cat is dead. Most importantly, she is deeply, seemingly, irretrievably sad. She can't imagine a day that is going to be any better with her living in it. Living has become nothing but a chore. And so she decides to end it, and she does. She overdoses with antidepressants, and the world goes black. And then Nora wakes up. She's not in heaven, she's not in hell, she's not really in a purgatory, but she ends up in a library, the Midnight Library, and we learn it is the place that people go when they find themselves in between, hanging precariously between life and death, and not entirely sure of which way to go. In the book, the library is immense and endless, and it is filled with nothing but books and shelves. And curiously, who's there with her? Do you remember? Her high school. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourselves. Okay. Mrs. Elm, right? Her school librarian.
Yes.
Her school librarian, and she's there, and she's the only person there. She becomes her guide, and she says to her, listen, Nora, here's the story. Every life contains many millions of decisions, some big, some small, but every time one decision is taken over another, the outcomes differ. An irreversible variation occurs, which leads to further variations. And these books in the library are portals to all the lives you could have been living. Nora, what we know about her, she is just absolutely racked with regret about the decisions she's made in her life. The Midnight Library is the place where Nora goes to find out about her alternate lives. For an hour, for a day, sometimes for a month, she's able to dip into, to actually sample lives where she made different choices, with the ultimate goal of erasing those regrets and finding a life that she's comfortable in. And of course, for those of us that read the book, we know that the story revolves around all these different lives she passes through briefly and their consequences. Okay? So, just briefly, I want to remind you of the characters. Nora Seed is our protagonist. Mrs. Elm is the librarian. Neil is a guy who owns the store that the guitar store where she gets fired. Joe is Nora's brother. Ravi is Joe's very dear friend. And Nora's dearest friend is Izzy, right? That's an important person to know also, if you remember. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more. Oh, also Hugo, we're going to meet Hugo. Remember him?
Yes.
He's another, we're going to call her a slider. She's sliding between lives, and she comes across Hugo. He's also a slider. Okay. Well, first of all, let me ask you honestly, just so I know where to go with this. Did some of you not just nod? Did some of you not read the book? Did some people not know the story of the book? Okay. So, how many of you enjoyed the book? Enjoyed the book? Yes? Enjoyed it? Yes, yes, yes. How many of you kind of so-so? So-so? How many really didn't like it? Oh, you were so-so, Beverly? Okay. Who didn't like it? Anybody? I can't see those of you that are just names. I'm not seeing how you felt about it. So those of you that liked the book, why do you think it was so popular? What was it that why do people like this book so much? What resonates?
I thought it was the style that he used, the writing style, and it's very different because the way the going in and out, dipping in and out of different lives. That was
Right.
Something I've never read, that type of book before. It wasn't really, it was almost like some of the paranormal where they're shape shifters.
Yes.
You know, when they change from human to animal, but
Right.
this was still, it was sort of like a time travel as well.
You bring up such a good
Like
point.
a combination
It
of
was. It really
styles.
was. And he makes a point of saying, you know, he wrote the memoir, which was a straight story of his life, but he wanted to go ahead and write a book. He says he likes to look at this through, he likes to look at reality through the prism of fantasy. Really, it's a fantasy
Mhm.
book in many
Mhm.
ways, right? It is. It's like you're
Yes.
talking time travel and all those things. It's a fantasy book. So he wanted to write about that to give himself the room to be able to talk about this whole concept of parallel universes. And I found that to be really an exciting and interesting topic when he talks
Interesting.
about the fact that it's real. There are people that in quantum physics talk about the fact that where we're living now and the way we're living now, there are other universes,
Other alternate, yes.
right? So I
That's
thought that was sort of
interesting.
interesting. So it's fantasy. For some people, that's really, they understand that there is a reality of that if you understand quantum physics, which he does try to explain, which of course gets a bit
Yes.
complex in the story, but it is interesting and you do learn something from it. So he wanted to write this as a novel. He wanted it to be fantasy, as you're describing, Lynn, because he wanted to give himself the room to talk about
Right.
other life experiences. Anything else? Anyone want to comment about the style? Anyone else want to say anything about style? Let's talk about the theme of the book. What are some of the themes in the book? Even those of you that haven't read it, you can even chime in because I gave you enough of a summary talking about parallel universes. Oh, Sandy, do you need to be unmuted? You know something? Kevin, are you still on?
Yes, I'm still on. I will unmute.
Is Sandy Borwick, is she, can you unmute her? I'm seeing ask to unmute.
Yep, that's what I'm seeing too.
Okay,
It just asked to unmute and I clicked it. She needs
Okay,
to unmute on her side.
okay, Sandy, if you want to chime in, you gotta, I guess, oh, okay, now you're muted, it looks like. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, great. I'm so glad to see you on board here. Looking forward to whatever you have to add.
Glad to see you and hear you too.
Oh, great. So let me ask you this as far as theme. Did this theme seem familiar to you? This story? Yes? Go ahead. You have to unmute. I'm sorry, tell me your name again. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. It says ask to unmute.
Call from Andrea.
It says ask to unmute.
Call.
Okay. I have to come back to you. Okay. Lynn, did you have something you wanted to say?
Okay.
No, I'm not following where you're going with this
Okay.
yet, about
Oh,
the
okay.
theme of it.
Lila's asking about to be unmuted also. I don't know why all of a sudden we're having trouble with that.
I don't know.
Lila, are you on trying to unmute also? Okay, hers came up, asked to unmute. Okay. So let me tell you what I'm seeing and what the author intended for us.
Okay.
The similarities between this and the one movie we are now going to be inundated with is the Christmas holiday star.
A Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Wonderful
And it
Life.
does that
Yes,
intentionally.
yes.
Why? Do you remember how the rock star that she's with, the rock star is Ryan Bailey, which is of course
Right.
a
That's
play
right.
on George Bailey,
George
who is
Bailey.
the protagonist in the
Yes.
movie, of course, right?
I'm with you now. Yes, yes.
The little town that Nora lives in is a very good description of an English town, but
Bedford.
at the same time, it's just like the
Like
town.
Bedford.
Like Bedford, exactly. So you really see, he really did intentionally want to give us those clues. Anything else that anybody thought about in terms of themes? So parallel universe, what happens, what if this didn't happen, that didn't happen, anything else?
You had not lived, this would not have happened, just like in A Wonderful
that's
Life.
right.
Like you said, this is the season we're going to be seeing
That's
it
right. We're
all
going to
over.
Do you guys remember a movie called Sliding Doors? Did anybody see it? Okay, it's this guy who's rushing to make a train and he just makes it. The doors are ready to close. And it's the story of what happens if he did not make that train. So again, it's a popular theme. The whole idea of choices. I don't know. I felt like this was all about choices.
Choices.
Did you guys see that as a theme also?
Yes.
Yes.
And it made me think back to a poem. What poem am I thinking about? From all of us had it in 8th or ninth grade English. Robert Frost's poem. Do you remember that? The Road Not Taken?
Yeah.
Okay. So I actually wanted to read it to you real quickly because that's really, to me, summing up a lot of what this book is about. And it's a short poem, but I'm going to read it to you real quick. The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost. Two roads, you're going to remember this as I start to read it. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Remember this one? And sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. And then I took the other, just as fair, having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for passing there, they really looked about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. But I chose the first one for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted I would ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, do you see what the
Okay,
connection I
yeah.
make with this
Yes.
poem to this book? Okay. What I loved about Robert Frost's poem is at the end, if you remember this poem, it says, that's the road I took and it's made all the difference. And we always think of it as a positive ending, that was good that he chose that road. But the reality is he never
That's
really
true.
says that in the poem. You really don't know. Was the difference good? Was the difference bad? We don't know. And he says ages hence, he'll look back on it and he'll remember that he was at this fork in the road. So it's kind of an interesting thing. From the beginning, we see that Nora is really depressed. What are the indicators that she's really depressed and in a bad way?
Oh, she's just
She's
beside
doing
herself.
She's indecisive, very indecisive.
Indecisive, what else?
She's not happy with what she's doing as
Not
opposed
happy.
to what she thought she would be doing.
Okay.
And she's in a completely different place than she wanted to be. Even her cat dies. She just feels like everything's going in the wrong direction for her, and that
Exactly.
she doesn't feel that she is wanted in this life. She doesn't feel needed or wanted, and she wants to die.
Yeah, she wants to die. We see that right from the get-go.
Mhm.
Hopeless.
What else? Picture that her mother
Hopeless.
died 3 months ago. So she's lost her mother. She gets fired from her job where we know
Yeah.
she shows up unkempt. She's late for the job. She forgets the piano lesson with the one student that she has. She's in a bad way. We see that. And what's interesting about Nora is it's a contrast to what everybody thought of how she'd end up as a child. What was the expectation for her? Do you remember? What was the
Olympic
expectation?
swimmer.
She was going to become an Olympic swimmer. She runs into a person that she knew in her youth, and the girl says, I know you. You were a super brain. You were the one the teachers all expected to go to the Olympics and win at the Olympics as a swimmer. And she, of course, had all of this potential. And in fact, she sees herself now. How? How does she see herself?
It's nothing.
Failure.
Failure.
A failure.
A failure, exactly, that she has absolutely nothing to live for. And she feels like she's disappointed everybody. Who has she let down in her life, according to her, among her regrets? Who has she let down in her life?
Her brother.
Her brother.
Her
She
best
dropped out of her
friend,
band.
Izzy.
Izzy, her girlfriend. She never went to Australia with her. Who else has she let down?
Her father,
Why her father?
right? Because he wanted her to be the Olympic swimmer.
The father had every dream that she would become the
Hmm.
Olympic swimmer, and she gives that up. So she disappoints her father. Who else does she disappoint? How about that guy that was anticipating marrying her 2 days
Her
later?
boyfriend, right.
She doesn't show up there, exactly. So she sees herself as a total loser, as she's just failed at everything. What's interesting is that the author puts in a lot about, we said quantum physics, which is a parallel universe. He also puts in a lot of philosophy. Why do you think he puts in all this philosophy? So what I came to realize is that what do philosophers do? Well, what do they do?
Philosopher.
They
Like,
philosophize. They philosophize.
why?
You know what? They really grapple with the big questions. And what are the questions? It's all about existence. Interestingly enough, what is Nora doing? Carol, were you going to add something?
The meaning of life.
Like,
Thank you. That's exactly right. And poor Nora, she's doing the same thing. She's searching like a philosopher in her own way. She's looking for the meaning of life. Exactly. That's it. So now she gets to this library, and Mrs. Elm has described everything about the library, and she understands philosophers are grappling with life, but all she's thinking about is, oh my God, I have taken every wrong move that there is. And Mrs. Elm says to her, listen, think about it. What would you have done differently if you had the chance to undo all your regrets? And she says, you have an amazing opportunity. You're in this library. You can choose another life. Just go for it. And if you find a life you want to live, then you get to live it until you die of old age. And she decides she's going to start with this process, and she starts to choose lives. Now, what's interesting is one of the thickest books in the library is called the Book of
Regret.
Regrets. And of course, it makes you think about how thick would your own book of regrets be if you had it. You know, it's amazing how her regrets, she has so many regrets, and she has very large regrets in her life. And we're going to talk a lot about that as we get into the idea of regrets. But the question I have for you is, number one, why was her middle space a library, and why Mrs. Elm?
that's where she grew up and spent a lot of time. And Mrs. Elm, the librarian, in her before she's talking about dying, she says that was the only person that was really nice to her and gave her time. Like after she lost her mother, she
Right.
really looked up to her. That was like the one person she could count on.
Yeah, you've really hit it, because really Mrs. Elm was the only one, the kindest person to her, who really remember. And what did Mrs. Elm do in that library that was very meaningful to her? She, if you remember, she gets the phone call that Nora's father had died.
Yeah.
Remember that? And she extends such comfort, and you could just picture her enveloping this child in her arms and really comforting her. And she remembers that. And like you say, the library was such an important place to her. It was her sanctuary. And I couldn't help but think it was funny. All her hours in high school and up till that point, until it wasn't, was in the swimming pool. She was training to be an Olympic swimmer, right? And all of a sudden, you'd think that a pool would have been her safe space, but it wasn't. Why not? Why not?
Because she was kind of forced into that by her father. I don't think it was her choice. He was pushed her.
Right.
So she felt pressured by that.
Right.
The library was her safe place.
The library, it was her sanctuary at that point, right? It was her safe. And she went there because she didn't want to be in the pool. Okay. Anyone else have anyone you wanted to add? I saw a couple of you start to speak, but you were muted. Okay. What about the chess game? I found that really interesting. What do you make of the chess game that she was constantly playing chess, Mrs. Elm? What do you think?
I think that was her own life that she was sorting out on a chessboard. I think it was like a metaphor type of thing.
Exactly. It was a very interesting extended metaphor for life, wasn't it? And I love how Mrs. Elm says to her, listen, you remember we used to play chess? She says, I'm going to remind you that a chess game, like life, is never over until it's over. And there were a lot of lines in there about chess games and life. It was a wonderful extended metaphor. And I particularly love this one. I don't know if any of you know anything about chess. I know very little about it, except I do know that the thing you don't necessarily want to be left with maybe is a pawn. I love the way she talks about, Mrs. Elm says to her, a pawn is the most magical piece of all. and remember, this is an extended metaphor. It may look small and ordinary, but, and this is the part I love, a pawn is a queen in waiting. All you need to do is find a way to keep moving forward. That's really a lovely idea, isn't it? All you have to do is keep moving forward. And then even a simple pawn. And of course, the author kind of beats the metaphor to death by going on and saying all of us are pawns, you know, depending on, but we all have the potential to become the queen in waiting, of course. I also love this part of the metaphor. She says a chessboard is beautiful, set up with all the pieces in place, just like life. No variations are a part of the setup. But then the game begins and the board becomes chaotic, with chaos building with every move the player makes. Every move opens a whole new world of possibility. There is no right way to play. It gets very messy with so many possible ways to play. In chess, as in life, possibility is the basis of everything. And I think that's great because it shows you how every move, as in chess, influences the outcome. Any other comments about the chess game? Anybody? Okay. I want to talk a little bit about her lives that she gets to taste, that she gets to sample. Now, remember, one of her main regrets, and by the way, what she's trying to do in all these lives is undo a lot of the regrets that she has. She thinks, I regret that I didn't marry Dan. Now I'm going to get a chance to sample the life I would have had with him had I not made that ridiculous decision to not marry him. Now we go to her life with Dan, and she's obviously, we know how smart she is, by the way, because she's able to pick up wherever, you know, wherever she is. She's able to move forward in these lives. But she ends up now with Dan. And where are they living? Do you remember?
They're living, they got the bar that they had talked about when she was
Right.
still alive,
They're
and
in
they're
the
living above that.
Yeah,
That
the
was the-
English countryside. They've got a pub that
English,
they
right.
talked about. Right. So she seems to be having a nice life with him. But then all of a sudden, she starts to notice certain things, and certain things are revealed to her. Do you remember what's revealed to her in this life? She thinks she's so sorry she didn't live, regretting that she didn't marry him. And all of a sudden she realizes what? Well, for starters, she realizes he's drinking a lot. And he's getting very angry when she even mentions his drinking. And she remembers that he was never supportive of her music career. In fact, he told her that they were going to bomb out, that they wouldn't even make it. And he was saying her brother was very selfish. He was talking bad about her brother, that he was selfish, that he was using her. And then she also remembered how, you know what? All his jokes, they hinge on other people, making fun of other people. And all of a sudden she starts to think to herself, you know what? He's making me the butt of a lot of his jokes. And then she also realizes when he comes home late one night, she says to him, Dan, where were you? And what does she realize?
He's has someone else, I think.
He's
Yeah.
cheating on her. Exactly. For me, the summation of it all is when she says to him at the end of when she's about ready to leave that life, she says, Dan, let me ask you something. Are you happy? And he answers her, no one's happy, Nora. Well, doesn't that kind of sum up why you wouldn't want to stay in that life?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what happens when she leaves that life with Dan? What happens to the regret that she's been holding inside of her? What happens to that regret?
She lets it go.
She lets it go. It's gone. She gets rid of that regret. It's one little regret that is tossed out of that book of regrets. Exactly. So let's think back, those of you that can remember or have read the book, how many of you remember some of her other lives and what she learned from those lives?
Well, she did the Olympic swimmer, where she actually did become the Olympic swimmer.
And what
She
is she
dropped
realizing?
in and she's giving these like speeches because she is no longer a swimmer, it's post swimming, but she's still very famous. And her brother was kind of involved in her management and stuff like that. But when she goes into that life, she has to give a speech. She has no idea what she's doing. So she
Yeah.
kind of has to fake it, but she's real famous. All these people know her. She has a personal assistant, but I forget what happens at the end. She gets out of that quickly because that she saw wasn't what she wanted either.
Exactly. And so she has this life where she has this fame. I love the idea that when she goes into a new life, she looks at herself in the mirror and she sees all of a sudden in this life, she is so healthy. She looks athletic and rock
Yeah.
hard stomach and she looks beautiful.
Mm.
She's dressed
Yeah.
gorgeous in expensive clothes. She's in an expensive hotel room. She's been
Yeah.
she was successful as an Olympic swimmer. Now she's a motivational speaker.
Yeah.
But she starts to realize, as you say, there are a lot of downsides to that. Number one, she realizes, all that time in the swimming pool, I was never living my dream. Whose dream was she living?
Her father's.
Her father's dream, her father's dream. And all of a sudden she realizes, you know what? My mother's gone. I'm single. I'm left in this expensive hotel room, but I'm lonely. And she starts to realize, too, that all of a sudden people are very jealous of her. And she doesn't like that feeling. They're envious of her. And she starts to realize that, you know what, it really isn't that wonderful. It's not all it's cracked up to be. She starts to lose any sense of who she is. And she begins to feel that all of a sudden, life has not only, this decision to live this life has not only impacted on her, but what's interesting is what we see is how that life impacted on others. And this is what I wanted to, Lynn, this is the thing I was going to remind you about with that life too. Picture that when she was an Olympic swimmer, what happened? Her father came to all the swim meets. Now remember, her father dies, I think, of a heart attack or something, right? In real
Right.
life.
Right.
And in fact, when she becomes an Olympic swimmer, everything changes. That one decision she made alters the fact that the father becomes absolutely a health fanatic. He's healthy as could be.
Right.
But
Right.
all of a sudden, he's there and he meets the mother of another Olympic swimmer. And what happens as a
That's
result of
right.
her decision? The father divorces her mother. He
That's
remarries
right.
the
Yes.
mother of another swimmer.
And she didn't
And
like that.
that mother ends up dying first,
Yeah.
dies young. And all of a sudden she starts to realize, oh my God, my one decision to become famous has altered the life of my mother. It's altered the life of my father. And she starts to see how, and we all know this, whatever decisions we make, of course, it has an impact on not only on us, but everyone around us.
Mhm.
What other life was interesting to you, and what does she learn in those lives? Any other thoughts?
The other, well, she got out of that life because she saw, especially when the father married,
Right.
she wanted to get out of that.
She gets out of that.
But she went back to the library, and I think Mrs. Elm said, well, you always wanted to be some kind of scientist and go to the Arctic Circle.
Yes.
And so she did. And that's when it got really interesting to me, because that's two things. There was global warming going on, and she was saying that how that was destroying the whole world, which means it was current time.
Yes.
Kind of, it's like what's happening to us now. And also that's where she met Hugo,
Right.
which got into the quantum physics,
Because
which
he's also a slider. He's in the same
a
boat.
slider.
But remember, what's interesting about Hugo, he didn't have the library and Mrs. Elm. What
It
was
was
his
a video store.
a video store, and it was his uncle who had extended great kindness to him. He's the guide instead of Mrs. Elm.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So, and then they talk about root lives, their
Yeah.
root lives, and they all have a person like Mrs. Elm, and he has the uncle, and the quantum physics. And that's where they start using the word slider and stuff like
Right.
that,
Right.
meaning
What I-
going
What
out
I
of
wanted,
line.
what was really also, and by the way, everybody, please feel free to just chime in, okay? Those of you that have read the book, or even if you just have thoughts on it, just
The
jump right.
other interesting thing about the being in the Arctic was the bear.
Thank
And
you. That's where I was
Oh,
going.
yeah.
she got so scared she was gonna die. She realized she really wanted to live.
Live.
Thank you. That was
Yes.
one of the most impactful lives for her. Just like she learned all of that, it wasn't so great to be a rock star. A famous, inspirational, wealthy speaker. She realizes this other life in the Arctic is a hard life, right? It's freezing cold, but she comes face to face with the polar bear, and that's a very, very important scene because in that scene, what does she realize? Up till now, what's her goal been?
To die.
Die.
Die. And all of a sudden, here's this bear, and she starts to freak out, and she throws off the flare. She beats the pans together to make the noise, and she's doing everything she can to stop the bear. And he keeps coming forward, and she thinks to herself, "I am really going to die from this polar
So
bear."
she fights to live.
And she fights to
fights
live.
to live.
And it's ironic because at the
Right.
end, the other researchers who come to her aid, the other researchers in the Arctic that are with her on this glacier, they say, "Oh, of course you're traumatized. Of course you are. Listen, you just came face to face with a bear." She thinks to herself, no, they don't get it. The real reason why she has this reaction is because for the first time in her life, she's actually afraid to die. She doesn't want to die. And it's a huge moment for her. A lot of things happened in that Arctic life too. The other thing was, remember, this is a girl who was so lonely. She felt she had no one in her root life. And we use that expression root life, meaning her real life, right? So she's feeling like she has no one. Her relationship with her brother is gone. The relationship with the girlfriend is fraying. She just has nobody around her. And so here she is now in the Arctic. And if you remember from the story, she gets off her ship, her exploring ship. She's supposed to be the spotter. They give her a gun, they give her flares, and she's supposed to look for polar bears so that she can warn the other researchers who are now scattered around on the glacier. She's going to spot the bear, and she's going to warn them that there's a bear nearby. For the first time in her life, all of a sudden she's in this beautiful wilderness, and she's really enjoying what? What's she enjoying?
Life, living.
Living, enjoying life. And what else is she enjoying? She's loving the solitude. That was amazing. This is a girl who had been so lonely, but there she's loving the solitude. And the other very important piece of this experience for her, and there's a great line in there. I wish I could find it right away in my notes, but it says something about the fact that she appreciates the vastness around her. And there is a real metaphor there, which is that when you are in despair, you can't appreciate anything around you. Your view is just a very narrow view and a very dark view. But once you can experience the vastness of the wilderness that she sees and sees the universe around her, all of a sudden, and the author says this so nicely, if I could find the quote, I would. But the author says, when you see the vastness of the universe, hope emerges whether you want it or not. So that's the thing, when you're filled with despair, if you can see the vastness of potential and possibilities around you, you have hope. The problem is often when you're down in the dumps of that kind of despair, you don't see the vastness and all of the other possibilities around you. So that was a very, very intense and impactful scene in the Arctic. Any other scenes that you thought were interesting? How about the one where she becomes a rock star? Were you going to say something, Ruth?
Yeah, I just, I made a note to myself that there was a lot of quotes from Thoreau in the book. I just wondered what you thought of that. I read this book like a year and a half ago, so I've actually forgotten a lot, but what you're saying is reminding me of it. I enjoyed it very much, but that was something I noticed.
So we started to talk about that a moment ago, the idea of the philosophy. He makes her a philosopher, that she is a philosophy major because she is a girl, Nora, who is grappling with the same thing that all of our philosophers have grappled with, and that is trying to find out the meaning of life, trying to figure it all out. And she's really trying desperately. And of course, She quotes Thoreau. She loves Thoreau, who says, you know, go after whatever your dream is and you can make it happen. But she thinks to herself, yeah, that I love Thoreau. I love what he says, but nobody really does that. So right away you see her pessimism there. But she quotes all of these different philosophers because all of them had different routes to understanding what the meaning of life is. And that's really what she's grappling with as well. I started to ask you about the rock star life. What was that about? And what do you think she learned there? Why did she not want to stay in the rock star life? So by the way, we know she didn't want to stay in the Arctic. It was too cold for her. It was too scary for her. She wanted to come back. So she comes back to the library. Okay, she's a rock star. What did she not like about that? Here she's got the adoration of all these fans and success and fame. Remember that life? I thought that was really interesting too.
I think I stopped at that point.
Yeah? Who started to speak? Anybody? So what I thought was powerful about that life is that here she is, she's a rock star, and she starts to realize a couple things that she noticed when she was a motivational speaker too. People are jealous of her, people are envious of her. So you've got your people that adore you, you've got your people that don't care for you, don't like you. She says a couple of these successful lives, I love this line, it was sort of feeling like you were being kissed and slapped at the same time. So you can imagine that that probably is the way it feels for a lot of these successful people. But what happens to her in this life? It seems like it's perfect, except for one problem. She says to somebody with her in the rock band, she says to Ravi, who's Joe, the brother's best friend, okay, this is great. We are really great with this singing business, but where's my brother Joe? Where's Joe? Where's Joe? And he answers her, Joe's here. Joe's speaking to the media over there. Actually, is Brother Joe there?
No,
Not Brother Joe. It's Joe, who happens to be short for Joanne, who's their new manager. Because what happened to Brother Joe in this life?
he did commit suicide. Right? Yeah,
He overdosed, right?
he overdosed.
So again, you
Right.
see where she made this decision to live this successful rock star life. Joe went along with her, but he succumbed to it. So what you see is, again, this example of how one decision that you make, how life turns out, well, guess what? It had a great impact on her brother Joe as well. So she starts to realize that, you know what, maybe there isn't such regret about becoming a rock star. Maybe I don't need to regret that. Get rid of that regret. No regret about, I'm not sorry I didn't become an Olympic swimmer. I didn't like swimming. The only reason she sort of liked it in her youth was because she could disappear under the water and it would make her forget about her family arguing all the time. So you see where this girl was living this life of other people's dreams. By the way, interesting to point out, even when she was with Dan in that life, what does she realize about the pub? Remember that part? Living this lovely life in the countryside with a pub. The pub had been his dream. It never was her own dream. So she was always living other people's lives. Okay, so what other life was very impactful for her? Okay, what about the life with Ash, with Molly? For those of you that didn't read the book, anybody have an answer to that about the life with Ash and Molly? Okay, just to refresh your memories. All of a sudden, one of the lives she's now with Ash because she goes to Mrs. Elm and she says, Mrs. Elm, you know, I remember there was this guy who asked me out for coffee. In fact, he's the same guy who found my dead cat and brought the cat and brought it in from the rain and buried the cat. And, you know, maybe he was really a nice guy and maybe I should have gone with him for coffee. That's sort of a regret I have that I didn't go for coffee. Mrs. Elm says, well, why don't you go into that life? She goes into that life. She wakes up in bed next to Ash, right? And all of a sudden in that life, what's new in that life for her?
A child.
She has a child. All of a sudden, little Molly is in that life. Exactly. So here she's got little Molly. She's got this life with Ash. Did it seem to be a good life, do you think?
Yes.
It does. Why does it seem to be so good for her? Any thoughts? Why such a good life? It's a very comfortable life.
Secure.
It's a secure
Right.
life. She really, right. And why would I say to you, I think this and the Arctic scene were the two most impactful lives. What was so impactful about this life with Ash?
She loved being a mommy.
And you use the word there. She loved being a mommy. And
Mommy.
she all of a sudden felt this intense emotion in much the same way that she felt the intense emotion of fear when she saw the polar bear. All of a sudden, what's she feeling intensely in this life?
Love.
A love child.
Love. It's the first time she's really experienced this love that she's receiving from the child, and she's able to actually give love to this child. So she's got this very nice life. Were you surprised she didn't stay? You would have thought she'd want to stay in that life. Why didn't
Yeah.
she?
Wasn't her pattern.
It was her pattern, absolutely not to stay. That was one thing. What else? Why else
was-
doesn't she stay?
Maybe she felt she wasn't deserving.
Oh,
After
that's
so many
exactly.
years.
Such a good life. She didn't deserve it to be happy.
She didn't
That's right.
deserve to be happy. She didn't deserve that life. Exactly. It was not earned. And so she feels like a fraud in that life. She feels like she just entered into the movie like halfway through. She didn't own that life. So she feels this way. And if you remember in this life, she goes back to the old neighborhood. And when she goes back to the old neighborhood, what does she realize? Now she's inserted herself. She's Molly's mother. She's Ash's wife. What does she realize when she goes back to the neighborhood? All of a sudden, she passes String Theory, which was the name of the guitar store. And what's the note on the outside say? We're closed. We couldn't pay our rent. And she used to do a pretty good job selling there. And now they're closed. What else does she notice back at the neighborhood? All of a sudden, she notices her neighbor, Mr. Banji, that she used to go ahead and do errands for, get his prescriptions. Where is he now? He's in senior living. He's in senior living now. Yeah, now we're towards the end for those of you that didn't finish it, so this might be a little bit new.
It's okay.
This is senior living right now. So all of a sudden, his life has been impacted about the fact that she's not there anymore. And most impactfully is the fact that as she's coming back to go to Ash and Molly from the old neighborhood, she sees the police. And what are the police doing at that time? They are arresting a kid. Who are they arresting? They are arresting a gang member whose name happens to be Leo. And she realizes, oh my, Leo is the kid I gave piano lessons to.
Oh, no.
And she realizes that Leo's mother if she wasn't in this life, Leo's mother would not have been able to get cheaper piano lessons from her. Leo would never have found his calling of being a musician. And in fact, Leo would have joined up with the bad kids, would have joined a gang. And so he now was suffering a whole other life. His life trajectory was totally different than if she were teaching him piano. So she goes back to the life with Molly and Ash, and she's very conflicted. She wants to stay in that life. It's a wonderful, as you say, Carol, secure life.
Yeah.
She wants all of that. But on the other hand, she starts to realize, number one, I don't deserve it. I didn't earn it. It's not my life. It's this other Nora. And she starts to realize something else for herself. And what is that? She starts to realize her own significance. The fact that she gave piano lessons to Leo saved that kid. The fact that she was doing errands for this elderly guy meant that he could live on his own a little bit longer. The fact that she was no longer selling guitars in that store, perhaps if she had been still there, that trajectory of that store would have been different. And so all in all, she comes back to Mrs. Elm and she says, listen, I don't know what to say. I need another book. I need a book with the title, The Perfect Life. And what does Mrs. Elm say to her?
No such thing.
There
There
is
is
no
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 such
such thing. No such thing. Of course, we would all like to check out that book, but there is no such thing. Exactly. So Mrs. Elm says to her, now, what's happening around them? The Midnight Library is starting to disintegrate. Okay? It's starting to burn up. One row of books, another row of books, another row of books. They're starting to burn up. Mrs. Elm says to her, you got to do something now. This whole library is going. You've got to save yourself. You've got to find one special book. If you don't find this book, you're going to die. The whole library is going to go because obviously once the library goes, she's going to die, right? So she
Right.
says, you better find this one book. Go seek out this one book. So she starts to look frantically. She can't find the book. What's unique about this one book that Mrs. Elm wants her to find? Anybody remember the ending? The one book at the end has blank pages. All the other books have printed pages of her
Right.
life, the
That's
way
right.
it would have been, right?
She has to write
This-
her own.
Carol, go for it. What she has to, go ahead.
She has to write her own
She has
ending.
to,
Or
that's right. She has to write her own ending. She has to write her own life. Exactly. She has to start writing it. So she finds the book finally as everything is burning around her and she doesn't know what to write. She can't think of what to write, doesn't know what to write. And finally she writes at the end, the last words she writes on that front page, she writes what? I am alive. And as soon as she writes those words, guess what? She's
she
transported.
wants. She
To
wants.
her.
Go ahead.
She really wants to live.
That's right. It's the first time she has acknowledged that she wants to live. She really wants to live. And with this, the library disintegrates around her, and we see that the time is 1.5 minutes after midnight. So all of this, and again, this is the idea of the fantasy. All of this fantasy has happened. She has gone from one life to another life to another life. It's spanned days and months, all this time, but really in real time, it's only been 1.5 minutes since she took the medication and overdosed. And so what's able to happen at that point? At the end,
I don't remember.
she's able to vomit, throw it up. She's able to go to the neighbor. She's able to go to the neighbor and say, I did a really stupid thing, call 911. They call 911 and she is, of course, saved. So let's talk about something. What happens at the end, and why is the end a very powerful ending when we think about it? What happens at the end? Who remembers?
Never read it.
Okay, so those of you that don't remember the ending, okay, or didn't get there yet, because maybe you'll still
I
read
didn't
it.
get there.
Okay. At the end, she is in the hospital bed, and her brother comes to see her. Her girlfriend Izzy writes to her and says, I'm good. I think I'm coming home from Australia. I miss you and da da da. Okay. So what happens at the very end? Now she's had all of these regrets. Slowly she's been able to get rid of one regret after another because she's lived all these lives. Realize those weren't real regrets. They weren't bad decisions. So she has to throw away those regrets. When she's in the hospital bed, her brother, who she has regretted all these years that she was the one to blame, why in fact was their relationship destroyed? She let him down. And in fact, what does he say to her? He says, you know what, Nora, I'm really sad that I was really bad to you and I lost track of you and we didn't contact each other. He says, but instead of saying, oh yeah, because you left the band, no, he says, I want to apologize to you. I was going through a really rough time after Mom died, and I had just had a bad breakup from my partner. Remember, he was also dealing with sexuality issues because he was gay.
Yeah.
He said, I was going through a really rough time. I was drinking too much. I'm the one who let the relationship go. Oh my goodness, she thinks to herself. All of a sudden, what happens to her regret that she was the one, she blamed herself all those years. What a waste of time. Right? A waste of everything. He was it wasn't her fault. And yet she regretted it all those years. So one of the things to learn from this story about regret is that sometimes we shouldn't regret things if they weren't in our power at all, right? I mean, it was somebody else's issue. It wasn't even our issue. And yet there's probably so many things in our lives that we regret, and we don't really need to, because it wasn't ours to change. That's number one. And the second thing is, remember, she keeps saying, I'm even a terrible cat owner. I'm terrible. I let the cat out. I let the cat out, and what happens? He gets hit by a car and he dies. Oh my God, I'm a terrible cat owner. And what does she learn later on? What does she learn from this? The cat was not hit by a car. The cat had a disease, and he died a natural death on the side of the road. And she made an assumption. So sometimes, again, with regret, we make assumptions of things, and we take it on as a regret, when in fact, we can't make that assumption. This was something out of her control anyways.
Or
So
she takes responsibility. It's always her response for what goes wrong.
Exactly. She always took the responsibility. Even the things that weren't her fault. Right. She was taking it on herself. Right. So there's a real lesson in there. I think what she comes to realize is a lot of stuff. What does she come to realize at the end? So a lot of her regrets were a waste of everything, waste of time, waste of emotion. She shouldn't have had all those regrets. But the author wants us to have some takeaway messages. And that is, one is that it's really easy to mourn the lives we're not living. And he says to us, it is regret that makes us shrivel and wither and feel like our own and others' people's worst enemy. And part of the problem, and by the way, he talks about this a lot online in the interviews I saw, talking about the idea that we spend so much time comparing ourselves to the best perfection we see in ourselves, number one, but also comparing ourselves to other people. And he talks about social media, how damaging it is. Mm. The whole idea that when you go on Facebook, it looks like everybody has a wonderful life. In fact, the first line of the book says, she's opening up her social media and she's seeing how wonderful everybody else's lives are. They have all figured it out. She's the only one who hasn't. And of course, and this is what we say to kids all the time, nobody goes on Facebook or Instagram to depict what a lousy day they're having.
Yeah, right.
It's like, we do not, we look at everybody at their very best. Nobody tells the truth. And so, it's very damaging to be continually comparing ourselves. So she realizes that, finally, she realizes that she's different. She has a different perspective. She has really changed. She's no longer living the dreams of other people. She's no longer feeling she has to fulfill the dreams of the imaginary perfection of what she always imagined was perfect for herself. She doesn't have to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect friend. She can only be a human being who is answerable to herself. And she realizes she's different because she has now made the choice to live. So she sees that her whole book of regrets has finally burned to dust. There's an image at the end where she sees herself as a volcano. Do you remember that? Anybody remember that? Because she says a volcano can be a symbol of destruction, but also life. Once the lava cools, it solidifies and it becomes soil, rich and fertile soil. So in a way, she's like a volcano, right? She's now in a place where she can become that fertile soil. By the way, remember what her name is? Nora Seed.
Oh, Seed.
Right, the whole idea of Nora
right.
Seed, right,
Yeah.
the idea of, perfection. By the way, the idea that life is a tree, remember when she gives her inspirational talk, those of you that remember from the book?
Right.
She talks about how life is like a tree with lots of branches and twigs,
Yeah.
right? Well, what's cute is, what's the name of the librarian?
Elm also.
Yeah.
Elm, Mrs.
Oh,
Elm. And I didn't
okay.
think about this till somebody else reminded me, but
Oh,
even the
that's-
guy.
Oh,
at
that's
the end of-
right.
And what's the name of the guy who's important in the story? Ash,
Ash.
right?
Oh,
Ash, right.
wow.
which also is sort of a play on the idea of dust and the whole idea of, things burning to dust, starting over again, all of that.
Right.
So let me just see what I want to tell you else. Any other thoughts that you guys have about the book, or did
I
you?
just wanted to add that I like the phrase that Mrs. Elm used. She says, never underestimate the importance of the little things.
That's right.
I
The
think
big
that's great.
All
importance
the little
of
things.
little things. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
That's so true. Yeah. Any other thoughts that you guys have? So I'll just share with you that one of the things that the author says in some of his online interviews, he says, we spend so much time, all of us, wishing that our lives were different, comparing ourselves to other people, other versions of ourselves, when really most lives contain degrees of good and bad. And one of the things, by the way, she sees when she goes into these other lives, if you remember, a lot of them have a lot of good things in them.
Mhm.
But they also have their share of bad, their share of tragedy, their share of sadness. There is nowhere, the author writes, where you can be in a state of sheer happiness forever. And imagining that there is just breeds more unhappiness in the life you're in. And she realizes finally the regrets that she had while she was living and that she was living with, they were all wasted moments. And hopefully all kinds of experiences, even the negative ones, you learn something out of them, as painful as they are to go through. At least hopefully we can look back and say we learned something from them.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts anybody wants to share about the book? So, I think one of the interesting things is I don't think there's anyone who has not thought about what life would be like if you made other choices. And, someone said, well, they don't get it. They said they don't have such big regrets. And I said, well, listen, that is what the blessing is. And that's what, when you talk about mental health, all of us have regrets, right? Everybody has regrets. What do we do with regret? What do most of us do with regret? We have regrets. What do we do with it? When you have something you regret,
Think about it sometimes.
you think about it sometimes, but
But you move on.
You move on.
say it
You move-
again, Beverly.
Move on.
You move on.
Exactly. You move on. Exactly. That's the difference with mental health, is that we all have regrets. It's a question of what do you do with them?
Right.
So yeah, we all kind of, you sort of shove it down. And then like the pawn who's a queen in waiting, you move forward, you just keep moving forward,
Right.
which is what good mental health is. When you are the way this author describes for himself, which is, remember the beginning I shared with you about his own autobiographical information. When you're in that state of despair, what do you do with regret?
Dwell on it, I guess.
Dwell on it.
Dwell
And
on it.
you can't get out of it. You can't move forward. Exactly. So that's what's interesting when you have, for most of us with regret, you move on, you move forward, or you try to find a solution. If you regret something, you try to repair it, right?
Right.
I would think if you move on to other things, that regret in your memory fades away.
Yes.
You stop thinking about it because you
Yeah.
move on to something that you're happier with. And
Right. And by the way, you just made a good point, because sometimes in finding that solution, moving forward, you find something that was happier and you end up in a
Yes.
better place than you might have ended up.
yes,
Otherwise, you stay stuck in your life, and you live with that regret and stay stuck.
And if you stay
Yeah.
stuck,
Never move on.
you can't move on. And then you
No.
can't see any
Correct.
brightness. You don't see any positive in your
No.
life, right? And that's the whole idea. You just have to keep moving forward to try to find what makes you happy, and then of course, what this book also suggests is the larger question, which time-wise, we could talk forever, but
yes.
what would make a meaningful life? That's really what this book is grappling with too. What makes for a life?
You
What's
never
different
give up. You never
Attitude.
give up.
You never give up. That's right. What else?
Attitude.
Attitude. And what about attitude?
Well,
Positive.
I'm a big believer in cliches. I think they're marvelous because they're so true.
Right.
And I always think of what I thought while I was reading, the glass is either half full or half empty. And if you don't make the glass half full, you might as well stay in bed and put the covers over your head.
Mhm.
What a
Mm,
good point. Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
So it really is attitude. And again, in this case, when she was suffering from such despair, she couldn't have that kind of attitude. It wasn't until she had lived all these other lives, gotten rid of all that regret. And in her case, of course, it took fantasy to do it. What's interesting about the story, and even about the online stuff I saw on him, he doesn't talk about therapy at all, right? He doesn't talk about that.
really?
But what you do see in there is the idea that she is surrounded by a lot of love at the end of the story. She is surrounded by a lot of love, and you keep hoping that, let's say, if he was going to continue writing about her, that you'd find out that she sought out every opportunity to
Yeah.
become stronger, become healthier. Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts anyone has you want to share about the book? Well, this good. I think you're really. I think this has been. Hopefully, you enjoyed our talk
It
today.
was great.
It was great.
I
Great
think
job, Linda.
you know what I think about this book. It's interesting because a lot of people that I've recommended the book have said, I don't know. I kind of knew how it was going to end up, but the bottom line is the message that I thought the takeaway is that in every life there's ups and downs, and it is a question of what you do with it. It's like whatever life you're living. I love the idea that in this life, one of the things that I wrote down here is that she realizes that she actually, just like the library was part of her, all of the Noras were part of her also. She had the capability, she had the potential to be all of those people. That's what was in her. And now it's just a question of making it happen, doing the work. She had all that potential and it was still in her, and she was all of those Noras. And I thought that was it's a very positive takeaway in terms
Yes.
of really taking the life you have and just really making the most of it.
Like they say, life is what you make it.
By the way, and that's why I agree with you, Beverly, too. And Lynn, those cliches, they really do work. Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
So I want to thank you all for coming. And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing you all in December to talk about Eternal. And if you want to spread the word and tell a few other people to join us, that would be lovely for next month. Great. So we had a little philosophy today, a little psychology today, right? We've had it all. Great.
I'm going to go back
Thank
and
you.
finish the book. It's really a great discussion because we could go on and on about this. There's so many things that it touched on about life.
Right.
True.
The book.
And we were kidding around in one of the groups that I was talking to. He said, like really anybody who says they haven't thought about the alternate, universe, and we didn't realize we were thinking about parallel universes, but we were laughing and said, okay, we're not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many people have ever thought about what would it have been like if they had married the other guy?
Right.
Everybody started laughing. Yeah, exactly. Right. But what we hope for is that none of us have very thick books of regret. That's what you hope.
That's right.
Right.
True.
Okay, everybody. So listen, I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. And I guess
Thank
we're
you.
going to it will already be Hanukkah, so it should just be a happy Hanukkah as well. And we'll look
Yes.
forward to seeing each other in December, okay?
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Linda.
much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
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 Hmm.
Oh, what a pretty top.
Huh?
Mom and Dad got here okay? Good.
What do you want to cook for dinner?
I have what I had last night. I have a piece of chicken.
Mhm.
You know what you could do? There's a couple of sweet potatoes. You could bake one for me.
Okay.
Like in a hot oven for an hour.
The sweet potato?
It's in the drawer in the fridge.
Ah. One?
One.
Bake?
Yeah, you could do it in the toaster oven. Well, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Just I'll wash them and
Yeah.
remove this.
See. You can remove it or not, it doesn't matter.
Chicken salad?
No, that's tuna salad.
Tuna?
Yeah, I had that for lunch.
Okay.
Can you cut up some salad? I'll have.
Which salad? This?
No,
No?
no, that's lunch. I'm talking about for dinner, a green salad.
Oh.
The door is open. Okay.
It's not green salad. I do for you.
What?
It's not green salad.
What do you mean?
No, great. I do.
Yeah,
Oh. Wait, do you want red peppers and
red pepper and maybe, how about a carrot?
carrot soup? And pickle soup?
No,
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's carrots here. Carrots and celery. Do you want celery too or just?
yeah, a little celery, carrots. So your mom and dad got to see your grandchild. They got to see your baby first time?
Mhm. For my son?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Baby went to them?
Mm, I understand it. Oh, when I saw my first son.
No, they saw your grandbaby.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It was the first time that they saw him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah. When my daughter gave a birth, I stayed with her.
Right.
Mhm.
Your parents.
No, they don't stay with me with when my son is coming. No, but my parents when they came, saw my grandchild now.
Yeah.
Yeah, today because yesterday came in
Too late.
too late. 10 in the
Oh,
night.
yeah. Okay, good.
But today, maybe my daughter stay with my sisters.
Uh-huh.
Okay, another question. Your sweater yesterday use it's okay to be washed because it's some dirt in the color. Can I put to wash?
The blue sweater?
Then
Sure.
yeah, because it's a little dirty. Okay, let me need to wash it.
Oh, oh.
What time is coming the other lady?
Not till tonight.
She stayed with you all night?
Yeah. Oh,
And you can sleep?
I'm tired.
You walk just this morning or
Yeah, I had physical therapy already.
for the therapy? You go to the place or somebody come here?
They come here. Oh, oh. Mhm.